Hey, welcome to the 222nd episode of Just Shoot It, a podcast about filmmaking, screenwriting, and directing. This episode is brought to you by patron Betty Rezikova. I'm Oren Kaplan.
And I'm Matt Enlow. Today we've got director and writer Ani Simon Kennedy and producer/DP Cailin Yatsko of the new film, The Short History of the Long Road. It's a coming-of-age indie that we talk about kind of at length. It's really interesting. This creative duo has managed to both consistently make independent features, but then also develop their professional side hustles pretty consistently as a duo together. You know, and certainly they'll kind of do things here and there that are separate, but it's a really interesting creative collaboration and partnership, and we get to watch how it comes into fruition in both commercial and independent ventures, and it's really great. Also, we dig really deep into the casting conversation, which I think is something that's really pertinent to indie filmmakers who are looking to make that first feature and want to get some name talent into their movie. They talk explicitly about how they do some kind of unorthodox thinking relative to like what we typically talk about on the show to book Sabrina Carpenter, who is like a pretty big star to a certain type of person who is not me and Oren, because we're old. You knew who she was, though.
Yeah, I listen to pop music all the time. I love Disney stars. Disney music, Hollywood records.
Yeah, there you
Descendants.
go.
I worked on that.
Little over my head, but then I was like, oh, yeah, she's like a superstar, basically.
Yeah. No, it's really fun. I think one of the interesting things in our industry is teams and duos, because so many positions have such drastically different requirements. Like if you look at a writer, like how they spend their time and how they're paid for it versus a director versus a DP versus like an extra and a PA and a producer. It's like, you know, producers will work on a project for 5 years and not get paid on them, you know?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And a DP could work on 5 different projects in 1 week and get paid for all of them. And so when you are collaborating, when you're a writer, director, producer, and you're collaborating with a DP/producer, it's interesting to balance who's putting what work in and how the money is getting divided, honestly. Like I've seen, I don't know about you, but I have so many friends who've started production companies and ended up breaking up because 1 or 2 members of the production company felt like they were doing all the work, even though they were splitting the money evenly.
Right. It's a weird thing because when you specialize, right, like say cinematography being the easiest one, you know, you specialize in that discipline and the gigs are short term and just very specific. You're shooting things, right? So you know about lighting and electricity and all of that stuff, lenses. Whereas if you're a producer, your skill set is totally different, and you're learning about fundraising and paperwork and permits and negotiations. And so just by nature of the way that our industry works, some of those gigs, if you're specialized in a certain type of work, it's just a longer road. And this is that short history.
Oh, yeah. Short history, long road. Good one.
Fuck, man. I nailed it.
No, you did. You did. That was a reference to the name of the movie that we're talking about today, in case you missed it. The Short History of the Long Road.
Well, I can't wait to talk more to Ani and Cailin. But before we do that, Oren, I really have been dying to know what you've been working on lately.
Well, I have been in quarantine. Mm-hmm. And it's a weird thing to tell people that you're in quarantine because, I mean, obviously there's that kind of global quarantine. We're all kind of, you know, more or less sheltering at home when we can.
Sure.
But then there's like the, like when Andrew Cuomo says, if you come to New York, you have to quarantine for 14 days. And then there's the, hey, you have COVID, you have to quarantine. So there's kind of these.
And then there's the like, oh, I work from home and I go for a walk every day and I go to the grocery store once a week, quarantine.
Yeah. Would you consider yourself in quarantine? Like, would you tell people you're quarantining right now?
Yeah, I would say so. And I would say the difference between my lifestyle and what Andrew Cuomo was describing is probably pretty simpatico.
Right. Yeah. Well, so I, you know, worked out of town. I went on 4 flights. I stayed at a hotel. I was on a set with almost 20 people on it, though it was a very big set, like, you know, physically. And we all wore masks and distance as much as possible and whatnot. But still, when I came back home, my family decided it's best that I kind of stay away from the rest of the family for a week until I get 2 negative COVID tests. So I already got my first negative. I'm taking my second one tomorrow morning. And then assuming it comes back negative, I'm back. I get to re-enter my family.
You were accepted back into the fold.
Yeah, into the pod. I mean, we have a little pod, and it's, I don't know, this is not my unpaid endorsement, but there's this guy, Andy Slavitt, that I follow. I think I've talked about him before. He has this podcast called In the Bubble, and every podcast is just about those answers to questions that we all have that nobody is talking about. The news never
that's
talks
great.
About. Like, hey, can I hang out with my friends? You know? And if I do want to hang out with my friends, how do I do it safely?
Yeah.
Like, people are talking about, like, can I go to bars? And it's like, I just want to know if I can, like, go to my neighbor's house, like.
Yeah. I would like to know if I'm in a backyard and we are all well over 6 feet away from each other, do we still have to wear a mask?
Yeah. I mean, I think if nobody at the event is an especially high risk individual or lives with especially high risk individuals, I would say, like, if I'm over 10 feet away from someone and I'm outside, I would be fine without a mask. And that's kind of like on set when you have lunch, you can't wear a mask. So we did distance ourselves. And I saw America's Got Talent is shooting now, and they're doing it all outdoors. All the hosts are, like 10 feet away from each other. It's interesting, and it's all a calculated risk any way you look at it. But anyhow, because I've been in quarantine, I feel like I've had a life that's a lot like yours. Wake up at 11 a.m., ask my mom what's for breakfast.
It's pretty good, man. Make some coffee. I think because work is still inconsistent and we're all talking about the earliest things that I'm talking about are for the fall. I was up for something that was going to shoot in July, but didn't get it. But so everything else is like pretty far off. So I'm really trying to like look at those long-term goals that I've had and just kind of dig in on those. So like it's a lot of noodling on screenplays and
noodles. Like you literally made your own noodles.
Yeah, we did yesterday, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and this week, like, we kind of have all been in this understanding that things will slowly get better, but this week things quickly got worse. So we don't even know if July is even a shootable month anymore, or August or September.
Yeah.
Who knows? Well, so one of the things that I've had time to do is I've had this whole pile of things to give notes on. Screenplays friends have sent, short films, even some of our listeners have sent. Some of our patrons, and I happen to have watched 2 features in the last 2 days that were rough cuts.
Yeah.
One was, and I'm assuming he wouldn't care that I'm saying it, but one was Ulrich Brussel's feature, who's the host of Making Movies is Hard alongside Liz Manischel. They've both been on our podcast multiple times. And the other one was your movie, What Are You Doing New Year's, which I watched last night on my 27-inch screen here in my old childhood bedroom.
Just like we always hoped. It's funny.
What's better than watching on my phone? Come on.
That is better than watching on your phone. The flip side being that I have slowly been sending it out to people. And it's a thing also where it's really tricky because you want it to be far enough along that people aren't confused by what footage you have or what your plan is, But also you don't want it so far down the road that like a pitch or an idea or a note unravels the sweater. It's really a specific point. And also like, fresh eyes are really hard to maintain. So like there's a lot of strategy involved with who you send cuts to and when and what sort of notes you're looking for and all that stuff. But it has been really interesting. And, I watched Ulrich's movie as well and obviously was thinking about our movie all the time and all of the notes that we've received and what was helpful and what was less helpful and what was encouraging and what's discouraging. And I thought, this would be a really perfect thing to talk about on the show.
I'd love to hear, since I haven't given you notes on your film yet, but I have already given Ulrich notes. I'd love to hear what you think what notes you hate getting, like what are discouraging and what are just bad notes.
Yeah, that's complicated because, going back to the idea of like your strategy of like who you send your film to and when and why, we have a really wonderful, vast network of filmmaker friends, all of whom have given really thoughtful, really generous notes. But the tricky part with sending notes to filmmakers is that because they are so generous and because they are so skilled, they immediately dive into the litany of things that you could improve.
Well, right, because in a way you're asking them for criticism, and they feel like they need to give you criticism.
Now, directly, that's exactly. We're saying, hey, what are the things that need improvement, right? And so they jump in and they talk about all the ways that they would change things or tweak things or make them better or clarify things or all that stuff, which is literally what you're asking.
Yeah,
you know.
But I guess the sensitivity here is a lot of times they'll tell you like, well, if this was my movie, this is how I would do it. And the fact is, it's not their movie, you know?
Right. And so you actually cut to the exact point I was about to make, sorry. Is that like, it is a thing where we have a lot of different friends, some of whom are never going to like our movie, or rather would prefer it if it were different than what we are aiming for, which is a really interesting thing to navigate. Because it's easy to be like, well, I'm going to ignore that note because it's off base, or they don't even like rom-coms in the first place. But that would be irresponsible and unwise anyway, you know. So like, really just being thoughtful of like reading the note, understanding where they're coming from. You know, it's a really tricky, complicated thing, and so. I have been slow on getting notes back to our friend Ulrich because I'm trying to be thoughtful and like understand what things he can tweak and what things he can't, and what's helpful to hear. And also, you know, it reminds you of like, it's really valuable to hear what's good about it so that people don't throw the baby out with the bathwater on things.
Yeah. I have like I have a lot of thoughts on like feature post and stuff. I think a big mistake a lot of people do, especially on indie features, is by the time they get to post, they're so tired of the movie and the process, and it's so thankless and it's not fun because you're not on set with everyone, that they just kind of like give up a little bit on the movie, you know, and they'll just cut out things that aren't working instead of trying to make them work.
Well, I call that joke fatigue also.
Oh, yeah, in comedies like, especially.
You think like, oh, okay, I've heard this joke 1,000 times, and we don't have the benefit of being able to put it up in a small screening room or anything, so you can't hear like what gets a big laugh or what gets a small laugh or what gets a tiny laugh. And so sometimes you're like, well, this joke isn't funny, it's not working, when it would have gotten a medium laugh. Right. You know?
Yeah. Or it even makes you like a character more or something. It doesn't even have to be that funny, but it's building character.
Right.
And tone and stuff. Yeah. So I kind of, my theory just off the cuff here is like there's kind of 3 phases of the notes kind of post process. And I think it's important to go through all 3 because a lot of people, like I said, just like give up after the first one. And I did a TV movie, like you pretty much don't have time to go beyond the first phase on those, but that's why they're not good. But I think the first phase is you cut it, you watch it with the director and the producer, and maybe you show it to the lead actor, or anyone else that you think is like deeply involved in what this movie is supposed to be. And as a group, you feel it, you know, and it's most helpful, I think, at those stages is literally just to watch the movie with other people and be in the room and see what they feel. And it doesn't even really matter what they say. You just kind of can feel when people are bored or not, which is very hard in the time of COVID. And then phase 2, I think, is probably the phase you're in, where you send it to a few people, and you have to be super careful, because to me, like, it's not just, are you going to give me good notes? It's, are you going to give them in a way that is not going to make me feel like total shit? Because I have friends that are amazingly smart filmmakers, but I just don't want notes from them because I get offended by everything they say. Yeah. You know,
it's hard because you've been working your butt off, but also know that maybe you need to hear them.
Yeah,
you know, that's
I think there's a way
complicated part of it
to give a note. Like my friend Ken Fuhrer, he's so good at notes. And he works as an executive at Disney, and he's done a ton of stuff. You know, he just jumps straight to being constructive. Like, hey, this like is this kind of confused me. Is there a different way you can do this? As opposed to like, this doesn't work, or I didn't like this, or you know, there's just a way to present it. The worst way is, and many filmmakers do this, and please, if you're listening, don't ever say this, is when people say, oh, why didn't you let me read the script beforehand? I would have told you this didn't work. Like,
brutal.
Yeah.
Right. Even though that's oftentimes true.
Yeah, but you know, but it's like so presumptuous that they're like so much smarter than you, you know? Yeah. And it's like not their movie, so fuck them. But then, the last phase, which I'm curious if you'll do, is like kind of more that test screening phase where you are really, now you know what is working about your movie, who likes it and who doesn't, and you are asking people specific questions like, not so much like who's your favorite character, but like what movies do you think this is like? Does this remind you of, you know, and like almost like half edit, half marketing, you know?
Right.
Like let's figure out where this movie is going.
We did send out a questionnaire and we sent it to non-filmmakers as well. And it's interesting, all of the non-filmmakers, their notes were much more effusive and fun. And like we kind of made a point of like sending it to some people that like we didn't know as well, you know, or like that only one of the producers knew and like their spouse was looped in and all of that stuff. And so I think that actually made it helpful. It's much more helpful actually, because then you have something to balance it against. You know, it's like, yes, the conflict could be sharper here, or like you could pace things up or things like that. But like also it reminds you of what's working character-wise, you know, which I think sometimes, you know, the tone and the energy and the vibe of the film, especially with ours, you know, it's kind of like a fun holiday romantic ensemble comedy. And so you can sharpen a narrative to a super fine point. And I'm not saying that one shouldn't, but also the part of the point of the movie is the tone and a feeling and a comfort, you know what I mean? Like the movie is like a funny blanket. And so, you know, so I think we've really started to like hone it down into something that moves almost maybe too quickly. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. And I do think when you get notes that are especially hurtful, it's oftentimes when they're true, you know, and you don't want to admit it, and it sucks. And when you get a note, you're like, that's just a dumb note. That's fine. It's probably not a great note.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, if it was my feature, I would send it to probably like 2 or 3 people that are like me, that give notes that are like, I think you could use some ambient sound in this scene, you know, to make it feel like lighter, more awkward. And I would send it some that are like my mom, which would just be like,
that was cute.
Yeah.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about this off mic, and you made the point of how you like to give notes by hopping on the phone with people and asking questions. I like that very much, because I think asking a question that maybe gets at the heart of like something that's working or not working, but you can ask clarifying questions and figure out if that's what they were aiming for, or just dive a little deeper on the thinking behind the way the movie is. Because like, if they do have coverage and they didn't want to use it, knowing why informs your actual recommendation, you know?
Yeah. Or like a lot of times my note will be like, do you have a close-up of this character?
Yeah, and most of the time it's like, no, we wish.
Right. But because, and part of it is like, because I write notes, like as I'm watching the movie, I'll write the time and the note. And I'm trying to do it pretty quick so I can pay attention to the music, to the movie. So sometimes my note will be something like along the lines of like, I don't get why we need the scene. Which if you are the filmmaker, that's like kind of an offensive note, I think. But if we are on the phone and I'm like, hey, this scene, like, and what was the thinking behind it? Like, why do you think it moves the story forward? You know, a lot of times I'll be like, well, we needed a scene to kind of break up this scene because we cut this, you know, then I won't give that note. I feel like for my notes to be helpful, A, they have to be honest, and B, they have to be like flow with the direction that the filmmaker is going, as opposed to against it. And so those 2 things, it's easier to do that on the phone. Whereas like, I know a lot of people are like, I don't like this movie anyway, so I'll just say it's great and stop. Or or they'll say like, the cinematography is incredible. When you're like, okay, that means you thought the movie was boring.
Yeah. You did it. You made a movie.
Yeah. Which is impressive on its own.
It is. And that is a compliment. But like, you know, if that's all you've got to say, think of something else. We're in that point now where I'm like, it's pretty fine, but we're like ready to move into like the sound and color stages, and I can't wait, because like the movie just kind of, those rough edges get sanded off, you know, like things that kind of bump or maybe are a little hard to see or are unclear, or, you know, like you can focus people up a little bit more. All of that work of just kind of polishing it. It's been a long time since I've anticipated that this much, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. That's why I love temping that stuff in as much as I possibly can.
Sure.
But everyone,
but it's process. Also, it's their own process, and it's like, I think in a shorter form circumstance, I insist that stuff gets temped in more. And like, there's still plenty, like the music and the sound effects and stuff, a lot of that stuff is in there. And like, our sound designer will just kind of add a fuller bed to it, you know? But like color in particular, it's just such a beast, you know, that, you know, there's a lot on most things unless it's, but the one size fits all lot doesn't really make sense for this movie. And, you know, our editor isn't a colorist. So at a certain point, it's just like, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, I do, I guess. And obviously it's way easier on a 30-second commercial than a 1.5 hour movie. But I will just like do Lumetri and Premiere, just curves or something, just to
give it a little something.
It's less about pop and more about evenness, you know? Like if one scene is blooming and super bright and the next scene is kind of dark and they're two shot and they're in the same scene, I'll just like try to balance them because I just don't want the notes I get back to be about that, you know?
Yeah. I agree. Or even worse, I think oftentimes people will not have the vocabulary to even zero in on why something bumps for them.
Yeah, like this scene doesn't. Just, I don't like the scene.
It's like, yeah, it's like you know, it's not as funny as it could be, and it's because you know, the sound, the mix is down, and
yeah, because the punchline is like
set up a little bit,
10 decibels lower.
Yeah, but there's only so much that you can do remotely over Zoom.
Yeah,
before you're just like, you know.
You guys have done all the editing remote. You've never been in the same room.
100% remote.
Screen sharing and stuff, or
screen sharing, yeah, which has been really. I think most of it's been really great. I think it's pretty rare. And Chrissy's been talking to the composer and has a program that I will look up the name of. But basically, it's designed specifically for music, and so it's like your headphones are plugged into his synthesizer. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Like, latency is not an issue. Sound quality is really great, and it's designed explicitly for that. It's cool.
Awesome. With that, we should probably remind people real quick that we have a Patreon. If you want to check it out, patreon.com/justshootitpod. If these tidbits about how to get and receive notes have blown your mind and you feel like you want to give someone a few dollars for that, then you can go to patreon.com/justshootitpod. And give us $1 a month, $2, whatever. If you give us $10, even for 1 month, we'll send you a Just Shoot It hat, which will protect your eyes from the sun, endorsed by 4 out of 10 optometrists. So, yeah.
Thanks so much, everyone. Let's hop into our conversation about the short history of The Long Road. Available now on VOD.
Congrats on your film, The Short History of the Long Road. Cailin, you shot it, and Ani, you directed it. Did you write it also?
Mm-hmm. And then we both produced it.
And you guys are longtime collaborators. You said that Cailin's shot everything of yours for 10 years?
8. Ever since we met in film school. Yeah. Oh, man. Just wait till we get to the 10-year anniversary.
You better have something good planned.
What film school, out of curiosity?
We were in a Prague film school in the Czech Republic.
Whoa!
Yeah, it was a 1-year film program that we both sometimes wonder how we ended up there, but we were so glad we did. That's
so funny. I actually went to Prague last year, and I said to my wife, I was like, oh, this is the exact sort of city you want to spend a year abroad in. It is like designed for college students in an insane way. Yeah.
And aren't like half the best DPs in the world are like from there, right? Or like Eastern Europe, that whole block.
There is a long tradition. All of our cinematography teachers were just these old school, like old Czech DPs who were just, they were great. I love them.
Yeah. I have to drink Pilsner or Kel just because I thought it would make me a better visualist.
Yeah, it does.
Good pull, Oren. Good pull. Well, awesome. So tell us a little bit more about the movie you're both promoting, and then we'll dive into, I'm curious to learn a little bit more about the DP producer / director producer relationship is really fascinating. But give us the lowdown on the short history of the longest history of the shortest road.
Many hats.
One of those.
Title on the planet. Real tongue twister. Yeah, the short history of the long road has been a long road because I started writing the script in 2015 when we were on the tail end of our festival circuit for our first feature, Days of Grey, which was very unique, and we can kind of get into that. The film had a live score that was performed by the 7-piece orchestral Icelandic band. So we were sort of on the road touring.
That's incredible.
It's a silent film, but I saw in the trailer there's sound design.
Yes, it's a post-apocalyptic coming-of-age movie that takes place in a future where language doesn't exist anymore. And so there's no dialogue. So it's not technically a silent movie. It's a dialogue-free movie.
It's like A Quiet Place before A Quiet Place.
Yeah, it's like the quietest place.
I'm very curious, not to go too far off on a tangent, but about the logistics and economics of traveling with a band with an indie film, right? Like an indie film is already, it's a costly thing to endeavor to do, right? And oftentimes you don't make your money back, but then also mounting effectively a tour on top of that. How did that shake out? How did that work?
It shook out in not playing in America ever. Because European film festivals have budgets through government subsidies and are able to kind of cover those costs. And we were invited to play at South by Southwest, but it involved flying, housing, and getting visas for 7 Icelandic people. And there was no way we could have economically done that.
What? Can you still get the laurels, though?
No, like
I think if they invite you,
it was a pretty...
nobody played there this year. And they're still putting their
That's a
laurels on.
different
them
deal.
now. So arts funding is what allowed us to tour in Europe. And we did play in Mexico, too.
And where did you shoot it? In Iceland?
Yeah.
And that was the first feature you guys did together?
Yeah, that was
2012, 2011.
And had you been collaborating before this on like your shorter form stuff?
Yeah, so we met when we were in film school. It was in 2010. And then right after, we really dove into doing a feature very quickly. I feel like ignorance is really bliss sometimes. And
it's kind of the best advice, honestly.
Yeah, it was like out
it.
of film school, like started up a production company in New York. And within a couple months, we were like, we should shoot this feature. Why not? What's holding us back? And it was
we were doing a lot of
crowdfunded.
music videos.
Yeah.
And so it kind of started as a music video that then snowballed into like an album length music video. And then eventually the band, Cailin, an Icelandic band we met in Prague, was ready to record a new album and basically said, shoot the movie first and then we'll score it. And that wound up being their 4th album. A
In
very unique
2010,
experience.
It must be a Red MX movie, if that's the year you shot it. Is
No,
it?
it was an Alexa.
What,
Oh.
2010?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
Iceland
we
was
got-
ahead
good
of the
call.
game.
Yeah.
I know, they were like, we've got these Alexas just sitting in our storage room. Would you like to use them? But yes, we would.
That was like when
those.
only like studio films like could afford them.
Yeah.
It was
It
wild.
was strange.
Because it was this Icelandic production company, Always and Forever Saga Film. We hold you in our hearts. But it was the summer that Darren Aronofsky was shooting Noah in Iceland at the same time. And so all of the equipment in the entire country was just gone, like entirely put to use.
And 2 of every animal were missing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the
And,
strangest to kind of like see us. There was one day that we were shooting just literally across the street from them, and it was us with our like 2 vans and 15 crew, and then just their small city that had set up across the way. We're like, it's fine. One day.
We'll join you for lunch.
Yeah. They wouldn't have
Darren?
known. We were like, can we use your bathrooms? That's really all we cared about.
Wow. And you crowdfunded that movie, you said?
Yeah, so it was
Yes.
half crowdfunding and half this Icelandic production company essentially putting up all of their services, from the equipment to the editing suite.
Are we allowed to ask what the budget was of Days of Grey?
Yeah, it was 100,000.
Yeah. And so we crowdfunded 50,000 on Kickstarter, and then 50,000 was through Saga Film.
That's
Gotcha.
awesome.
So that 50,000 is like in sweat equity, in kind sort of donations, basically. So not 50,000 cash. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
It was equipment and vehicles and editing days, kind of anything that they could lend to us. We used it. It was great.
And you produced that too, Cailin?
Yeah.
Like,
I tend to produce out of necessity more than anything, but
You were
I
in the
did,
room
yeah.
also when there was work to be done, Cailin?
Yes, I just happened to find myself there and took some tasks on myself.
Yeah.
I'm curious because, with director DPs, it's kind of an interesting relationship. The director, a lot of times, will try to work with the same DP every time, but a DP who just naturally does way more jobs than a director per year works with a lot of other directors. Is that with you guys too, or is it different since you're producing also, Cailin?
So in general, Ani and I, anything that we do through our production company, I then produce and shoot. But then I also simultaneously have been, taking jobs just as a DP separately because, while Ani's writing the next thing or we're prepping something, I can be shooting another project. So it has been kind of like a split personality sometimes and on those shoots where I'm just a DP, it's very nice to just take off the producer hat and be like, here's my list of what I need. Thank you.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me to hear of a producer DP because so often I feel like as a director, I'm much more aware of what's happening production side, right? And like my DP will like roll their eyes at whatever number production has given that person about like, how much money they have to spend on gear or whatever. But for the most part, they don't get it in a way that's both liberating artistically and frustrating as a person who is more production minded. Can you talk to us a little bit more about the way that being a producer has influenced your approach as a DP?
It's a blessing and a curse to kind of like have the behind the scenes knowledge about the numbers.
It's mostly a curse.
It's mostly a curse. For short history, when I sort of told our other producers, like once we got to New Mexico and we were in pre-production on the ground, I was like, my producer hat is off. I am now just a DP because at that point I would just have been kind of arguing with myself about rates and crew and equipment, and I just knew that it would get to be kind of too much. So I tend to do a lot more of the creative producing leading up to the actual shoot, and then on set is where I draw the line, just to not have those internal conversations with myself. But it is helpful for indie film. I feel like everything is a limitation. You just are working within so many limitations, and knowing all of that, it's helpful to not have to add the conversation between myself and producers that's like, but why is this, like, why do we have to battle it out? I kind of already know, and I just justify it in my own head and figure it out at that point. It kind of takes the middleman out of the equation.
I've heard that Spielberg literally has a hat that says producer and a hat that says director, and he literally actually puts them on.
I need one of those.
Yeah. And whoever he puts the producer hat on when he's wearing the director hat is like becomes
That's
the producer.
very good.
Yeah. They get screamed at.
One time a dog was producing a movie for 3 days.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's amazing. Yeah, I need to get some of those. I feel like it's it does get a little bit muddled sometimes, but for the most part, I do feel like it has been helpful. Just kind of being able to see stuff start to finish and also be involved earlier. Like Ani and I were talking about shooting short history for 3 years before we actually shot it. So it wasn't just like a short prep period with a director like you usually would have. It was a long sort of just internalized process that by the time we were on set, it was easy to, like, that was the easy part.
Yeah,
just kind of knew
amazing.
what we both were looking for.
Matt and I are often talking about DPs, and like we have our tried and true, the ones that we could just text and be like, hey, what do you think about this? And should we get this light? And what about this camera move? And here's a reference. And then there's the DPs where we're like, oh, on this job, why don't we work with like this amazing like kids fashion DP, like cars DP? And then it's like, am I bugging them? Should I not be texting them? And it's like, I feel like I personally fall back on the DPs I know I'd always rather work with, even if somebody has like an incredible reel.
I feel like so often the DPs that I'm trying to pitch to like an ad agency or something, their websites always suck. I don't know why that is, but at least I can be like, I know they did this spot, and like hassle them and be like, I can be like, hey, listen, you're going to lose the job, even though I want you, unless you can find a car night exterior example that you've shot, and like you kind of can't do that with someone that's, you don't have a rapport with, basically. Yeah.
True. The transparency is really so helpful.
Yeah. One last thing that's kind of interesting about the DP director relationship is, especially like with the DP that I've been working with a lot lately, sometimes I'm like, well, you're doing these 10 jobs and getting paid on 10 different jobs, and I'm writing or editing or working on all this other stuff and not making any money. But I see, Ani, that you do commercial stuff too on the side. How do you kind of make a living while you're mounting these big productions at the same time?
Commercials, like basically and that's where it's great having our shingle, because basically we are working together all the time on everything. And so if there's like a slower day, we can be working on feature stuff, but then we're ready to sort of dive right in if a client comes through or an agency, and it sort of feeds itself because we're always juggling like a bunch of different projects at once, where we'll have projects in different stages of development. It ends up being enough to float us. Like, we don't have any overhead of a typical production company. Like, we don't have staff, we don't have offices, to rent out. And so everything just flows to us. And since we're wearing these multiple hats, all of those sort of line items in the budget are there for multiple roles, but they just go to two people. And so,
right. And you're also getting the work.
Clean. Yeah. And so we kind of run it like a restaurant. Like, I'm the front of the house, Cailin's the back of the house. That's not really the case. I feel like that was sort of like our spiel, and now actually I'm like,
prefer that to be the case.
It's a good
I
spiel.
make Ani do all the client calls. I'm like, you do that. I'll be back here with the spreadsheets.
And now I feel like we've kind of shifted more recently, where we've been working with several different producers, and so we'll still get the job, but then they've been sort of handling specific projects just because they've gotten so much bigger.
Almost like you're a team that they're bringing on.
Yeah, and that sort of helps too in this sort of pitching, just because we can kind of, based on the client, either be like a one-stop shop that's like soup to nuts, or we can be just a director for hire, and then I hire Cailin as the DP, or we can do sort of like any variation of that. So it's a nice way to sort of be available for a lot of different types of jobs.
It's always interesting when you have like a small production company with 2 people, but then each person has like their own website also, and keeping track of who is who. But I mean, I think we're all in that same situation. It's just always interesting to see.
Yeah, especially I think as you level up, right? Like, as client demands and client services become more of the work, I think it's interesting to kind of, you sort of have to decide, like, oh, do I want to become like a big, production company and have overhead and like have mouths to feed, or is it that I want to just kind of stay in this certain thing, and does that limit the size of the job that you can take on? And it gets all complicated. But it sounds like you guys have kind of struck a perfect balance of being able to outsource what you need and keep the smaller jobs. You can have the whole pizza.
Yeah, and it's nice nowadays with like WeWork and stuff like that. It's nice that you can have an office for a week,
Right.
Also, it's just been interesting too, in the 8 years that we've been doing this, like, no 2 years or even 2 jobs have been the same. Like, we started out doing so many music videos, and we pretty much don't do that anymore. And we were doing
that's
kind
because
of like,
you want money. That's because you want money.
That's correct.
True. But also, even like, it's like we didn't kind of like stay in that lane. Even for like a lot of the branded stuff we were doing was a lot of like editorial stuff for Condé Nast or the New Yorker or, different publications. And then it was sort of like right as we were kind of like in that web series, like doc series, and we were like, oh, this is what we do now. Then like we shifted to like broadcast commercials. So we've just been kind of like riding the waves, and with the goal of sort of like making a feature every couple of years.
Tell us how. Look, I think we all can relate to that feeling of like, oh, I've got an idea and I'm talking to my core collaborators and, I've been noodling on this script, but there's always that kind of tipping point where all of a sudden the movie becomes real, right? What was that for you?
So the problem is that once we start things, we like see them through to the bitter end, literally for better or for worse. And so oftentimes it results in like, we're like, well, it's like we said we were going to make this, and it's year 4, and so like we still haven't made it, so it's still not done. On the flip side, what's nice is that like there's very few things that we end up pitching or that I end up writing that don't end up getting made in some shape or form, which is its own satisfaction. But then sometimes you're also like, these are not commercial movies, and so there could be an easier way. Like there's like a breezy rom-com that like wouldn't have taken 5 years. But this is something that we are coming to terms with in our own lives.
How did you end up funding this movie, Short History?
That was a long process. I mean, I feel like Ani is also a chronic applier. She applies to every grant and
An application.
Yeah, any application, she's done it. And we did learn from Days of Grey, where with that movie, we kind of like created it and just plopped it out into the universe. And people were like, whoa, where did this come from? Where did you come from? We had never done festivals. We had never done any of that. And we learned on that festival circuit that people kind of, once you get to festivals, a lot of those people already know the other people there, and they have known these movies while they've been being made. And so we were like, oh, we should have maybe announced that we were coming rather than just showing up out of nowhere.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So with
you're
short
talking about
history,
like in New Mexico specifically? Oh, you're saying with
No.
yeah,
Days
just
of
like
Grey.
in the industry, I feel like in general, you know, there's so many circles that you just start. If you're in it, you hear about all the movies being made and you kind of know where they are in their process. And with Days of Grey, we just came out of left
we didn't
field.
know anything about sort of, you know, how film festivals like will track projects for years before they're even made. And we kept seeing on the festival circuit with Days of Grey, like we'd be like, oh, why is it that this one movie's played like 50 festivals and this movie's played like 5? And it's like more oftentimes than not, the ones that have, you know, a jillion laurels also have done a ton of labs and gotten a ton of institutional support and grants. And that sort of like indie film world, we were not a part of, because before we teamed up together, I worked for a production designer on big studio movies, and I like was Wes Anderson's assistant for a little bit, and it was just sort of like the scale of those movies is like on such another planet. And then Cailin and I started making like our scrappy music videos and learning that there was sort of like a whole in between of this like indie community.
You're maybe just kind of helping me realize this now, but like it's hard for people to understand that there are so many little tiers that aren't apparent to one another, right? So like it's funny, Wes Anderson, like when you're younger, you think like, oh, well, that's an indie film, right? Even though he's making movies for millions of dollars and has, you know, 15 movie stars in each of them, right? But he doesn't understand, or wouldn't understand, metaphorically, I guess we'll say, like couldn't speak to individual knowing or not, but like that's a different world, and so that world isn't necessarily aware of a scrappy music video or branded content or Condé Nast, you know, New Yorker video world. They almost don't even have anything in common in terms of like ecosystem, in terms of people who were doing both, right?
Totally.
And there's that weird kind of middle ground of labs and grants and like your film independence, your Sundances, your, you know, a film society world, basically. That's again its own ecosystem. And so knowing who to talk to, and you know when applications are due and what they're looking for and which ones you're right for is a social skill all to itself.
Completely. And that was something that we like very much learned. Like that was our biggest takeaway from Days of Grey, was like find producers who aren't ourselves.
So what did you do first? How you realize, oh shoot, there's a whole world we didn't know about. What do you do?
So I wrote the first draft of Short History, and then we submitted it to the inaugural Bentonville Film Festival.
Sure, yeah.
Which was started by Gina Davis and Walmart.
It's kind of fancy, actually.
And it's very fancy. That is truly like the supernova collision of like worlds that have never crossed.
Right.
Like,
because the Walmart
America
sponsorship, there's like a ton of money in it. Tell us about the perks.
So they're 5 years old now, but this was the first year that they launched, and Cailin grew up in Bentonville, coincidentally. And so we had...
Yeah.
You invented
so her
Walmart.
family was like, this is so exciting, like this film festival's coming to town. So that's how we first heard about it. And Bruce Dern sponsored a screenwriting competition for the first year, and so the Short History of the Long Road was the first and last Dernsey Award winner. And that
cool
is how it got on the map.
How cool that Bruce Dern, how old is he? 130? He's just like, I haven't done enough in my life. I'm going to sponsor a screenwriting competition.
Right.
Gina, what?
For a festival that champions women and diversity. Bruce Dern was there to hand out the award. And so yeah, proud recipient of the only Guernsey Award. But that came with a little bit of grant money. And I feel like a lot of these sort of like prizes and festivals and grants and whatever is sort of like, once you get one, then that helps for the next one. So then we applied
so
to
So let me ask you, so that was your
Yeah.
that was your first win. Was that the first place you applied?
Yeah, that was like the first draft of the script.
That's the wrong
Which
no,
was-
that's,
Oh, sorry.
that's
Supposed
the
to
wrong
say you
answer.
applied
You
for 10 years.
Yeah.
Finally you
Unusual.
get it. No, it's
That's
probably
okay.
a good script.
That's okay. Yeah, it's great.
Can you just give us the logline real quick for the movie?
The Short History of the Long Road is a road trip coming of age drama about a young woman named Nola who grows up living out of a van raised by her father, and she has always wondered about her mother who left when she was a baby, and so she sets off to find her and tries to see what living off the road is like for the first time.
Cool. And so when you wrote it, did you have like a certain budget in mind?
No. And we
Like-
were basically just like, hopefully more than Days of Grey, but also, you know,
We could do it for that.
let's see, you know, the confidence of having pulled off a dystopian sci-fi movie felt like, okay, we can do sort of like a more traditional like indie drama.
But it's still a road trip movie, right? So it's still like a lot of
Yeah.
locations, a lot of traveling, moving
A lot of
cameras,
cars, right?
exteriors.
You know, in the years in between movies, you also have learned about a lot of creature comforts that you didn't have on that first movie that you're going to want, right? So that costs money. And then also, like, you've learned what's hard, right? Like, in the same way that you don't know what you don't know when you first started, now you do know.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a worse place to be. You're just looking down the barrel of a lot of complications from like a simple indie drama. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
but how many company moves a day? That's the stuff that you don't really think about in the first one.
Or
And
car rigging, you know, like even
Yeah.
that stuff is
Yeah.
brutal.
Yeah.
And so why did you want that to be your next feature?
Wanted the next one to be a talkie. Thought so yeah, I mean we've always loved road trip movies, and so I feel like a lot of these ideas and projects are really just sort of like excuses to have a reason to do things. Like, had never been to Iceland before, and I was like, well, if we make a movie there, then we'll have to go. So that was part of it, and having the lead be a young woman was something that I sort of grew up wishing I had more of, and then also fell into this deep and vast subculture of van dwelling, and sort of all of those elements came together.
Yeah, you were like, I have always wanted to be an Instagram influencer. How can I make a movie that will help me with that hashtag van life?
Basically.
Just want to do yoga on top of a van.
Yeah.
That's all we want.
And get like chips to sponsor us.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk a little bit about cast, right? Because I think maybe Oren off mic had mentioned how Sabrina Carpenter is in your movie. She's a superstar, right? And, you know, I think a lot of sophomore efforts, you know, I think people come out of that festival experience and they're like, next one's going to have a movie star. Next one's going to have a TV star. And
I remember after I made my first movie and we were trying to do press, they're like, yeah, but is there someone in the movie that could go on The Tonight Show? And I'm like, yeah, we could all go on The Tonight Show. They're like, nope. Nobody wants to see any of you.
Yeah.
On the
You're
Tonight
like, me? Maybe?
Yeah, you're like, I'm completely
They're like,
available.
Show. We'll get you on
I can
Channel
clear my
5
schedule.
morning news.
Yeah, exactly.
3-minute segment.
But so how do you say to a superstar with, 50 million Twitter followers or Instagram followers, hey, will you come be in my, like, dark, interesting indie movie? Because I made this post-apocalyptic Icelandic movie that did pretty well. You know, that's a tricky pitch, right?
Casting for me was the part of this whole process that I felt at the beginning the most like, we are going to play by these rules, and there's a very clear process, and they're sort of like very strict formalities, and we knew nothing about this whole world, but we were very much just like, you know, heeding the advice of various producers. And then
Can you give us
like,
some examples of what that advice is?
I mean, it was just like, you know, you write an offer letter and then you literally like put a message in a bottle and cast it off and like make a wish on a star.
But only
and
to
wait.
one person at a time.
And it was just this sort of like very like laborious process where, you know, and obviously simultaneously we'd be going out to investors and financiers and saying, you know, oh, we're out to this person and this person. And it went on like that for 2 years for all the roles. And it was getting to the point where it was just like, A, this is not getting us anywhere. And B, this feels like such an alien process, because even in the event where someone were to say yes, I don't actually know them. You know, I have no sense of who they are.
Right. And at that point, you've probably gone down the list a little bit and you're like, do I even want to offer this?
You're like, Megan Fox is cool and all, but
it's like,
you really
I don't know
find
if she can
yourself
play
entertaining
16.
so many different actors. You're like, they could do it.
You're like,
why not?
yeah. Oh, hold on, let me Google them real quick.
Yeah. And then simultaneously, originally we thought we were going to shoot in Louisiana. And so we also had a local casting director who was also putting, you know, just kind of did like a wide call and was sending audition tapes. And so we were sort of like, and we're totally open to discovering somebody really great and new. But it was just these two very intense extremes that felt very disconnected for me, especially for this lead role that's literally in every single scene of the entire movie. So it's, you know, we knew from the get-go the movie was going to live or die on whoever shoulders it ended up being. And so finally I think something people talk a lot about, and I'm just as an aside, is that people, you know, when you talk about a good narrative actor, they have to carry a movie, and especially in an indie film, like people need to be interested in watching them for an hour and a half nonstop, just standing there
and
emoting.
Also, you know, we haven't talked numbers, but like I assume that the budget is still pretty small.
Yeah.
And so sometimes superstars come with a lot of hidden costs, you know, like depending on if you need a big fancy trailer for them and a place to park that trailer and people to drive the trailer, all of that stuff adds up. And all of a sudden, even though they're doing it for peanuts compared to what they're used to making, you're still spending thousands of dollars that doesn't ultimately end up on screen.
And there's such a sense of sort of, you know, talking through agents and managers, and there's such a remove that, you know, it just felt so alien from how we're used to working, which is just like being very direct and very transparent and very, you know, just like on the ground. And eventually we did have someone attached, and then we finally got the financing, and then scheduling, basically like it didn't work out for scheduling. And so we were just like we were just sort of starting from scratch. And then that's when we were just like, you know what, like that we're not going to do offer letters anymore. Like at this point, whoever wants this part, like needs to fight for it basically. And
wait, so hold on. I want to pause you there though. So financing though came together once you had someone attached.
Not exactly. So
Not
that's
exactly. Okay.
I mean, the financing thing, I think that's also a bit of a fallacy where people are sort of like, you know, there's this catch-22 of like, you need the money for the cast, you need the cast for the money, which we were sort of dancing around too, but ultimately the financing was less about cast in our situation. It was more about people not wanting to come on board until it was basically until like the train had left the station. And so that was kind of its own thing. And then the financing wound up being 7 financiers, 5 production companies, 5 grants, 2 in-kind donations, and the tax credit.
And a partridge in a pear tree.
And it was like truly the patchwork. Like what our producer Kishori, when she like teaches like financing, you know, and she does different like film talks, she's basically like, this movie is just like the example of like every single possible source of financing. We just like got them all. So that was sort of financing in a nutshell. And then casting, I ended up just going through looking on agencies' rosters and just making huge lists of actors, and our producers would reach out to the agencies and basically say, you know, this is not offer only, but there's also no audition. And so all I was looking for was for people who are interested to read the full script and then meet me for coffee and just talk about it. And just for me to get a sense of like, can I actually work with this person? Are they, you know, what are they kind of seeing for this character, and making it really collaborative. And so then we wound up, I met 30 girls.
And who pays for coffee? You pay for it?
Yeah. Through our commercial.
Yeah. It's
Money.
a write-off. It's fine.
It's a write-off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to remember how it was a mix of sort of like coffees, some FaceTimes.
Right. The way you can get the coffees paid for is you just alert the paparazzi if it's like a big enough name. You know, if you're meeting with like Jessica Alba at the Starbucks, just can get paid for that.
Just as a heads up. So I want to go back to the list for a second. So you're going through CAA, you know, everybody's list, and you're saying these are all the people who could potentially be good. And then you're emailing that agency and saying, hey, I want to check avails on these people. This movie has a start date. No audition, but I do have to have a coffee. Is that literally what you're doing?
Right. And we have the Bruce Stern Award too. Right?
Sure.
Like there is some validation of like things that you
genuinely
people saying this script is good.
Yeah.
You know, Walmart loves this script.
Bruce Stern.
I think we were saying we had most of our financing. We had like half, but like
we're a go movie. We're starting.
We're starting. Right. It was kind of an ideal situation to just be like, I am available. The requirement is that they have to read the script, and then we would meet for coffee, and it was pretty clear who was like very excited about the role and the story and was very game to like, because a lot of it too was like, you know, are you down to not wear any makeup? Are you down, like, this is like going to be, you know, like just also being able to be upfront and just directly talk to people and be like, this is what you're signing up for, without this sort of like intermediary situation. And so out of the 30, then narrowed it down to like my top 6, and then did sort of essentially like a callback, but that was like our first real audition. But it ended up being more of like a workshop because I had 2 actor friends who came as readers, and then basically each girl, everybody had to do 1 or 2 of the same scenes, but then they could pick any scene of the script as like an additional audition, which was great too, to like see, you know, what scene they picked, how they interpreted it. Like it was really meant to be very collaborative, and also see how we do a lot of improv and, you know, like really kind of seeing who was ready to sort of make the role their own. And
you have, I mean, so knowing that you ended up with Sabrina Carpenter, who is, she's a musician, and she has a lot of, she's very known in certain circles, right? On the internet. She has videos with hundreds of millions of views. So I'm assuming a lot of the other people are kind of in that same level where they're famous in a different field, or they're on the way up, range. Or they're big TV, you know.
There was like a mix of sort of like people who had like a ton of credits under their belt. I forget the final 6. I think there was like 2 from CAA, 1 from UTA. Like it was kind of a range.
But did anyone say like, no, I'm not coming in to like do all these auditions and I've already did the phone meeting, I already did the coffee meeting, I already did this. Like,
there was
I can
actually
imagine
one,
some people.
I will say. I mean, honestly, I think the fact that it was such a huge role, like it's like you're going to entirely carry this movie, and so you have to fight for it. Like I think there was a sort of sense of like, oh, there's like real interest from a lot of different people. There was one actor who I really liked in the sort of coffee sessions, and then her agent was like, actually, sorry, she's offer only. And it was like, okay, then like she's not gonna get a shot at it. And I always sort of wondered if she ever knew that, like, I do think there's something, you know, agents and managers, like that's how they make their living, but it's also incredibly restrictive a lot of the times, and like their clients don't necessarily know what they're holding them back from. Well, so which is a whole other can of worms. And so, but then, so basically Sabrina just nailed it and was just so game, and there isn't a ton of dialogue in the movie, and she has such a great transparent quality about her. Like you can just read emotion so clearly on her face, even when she's not saying anything. So that was huge. And so, and so she got the part, and then that was one of the biggest hurdles.
It sounds like at the time you weren't even like necessarily looking for someone with a big social influence, but you ended up with someone like that.
But it is an interesting kind of fame, because I'd never heard of her prior to all of this, and she was in the Disney. They rebooted.
She was on Hollywood Records.
Boy Meets World. Too, right? So she was in Girl Meets World, and then she is after she was like a Disney star for 6 years.
After she met the world.
And then once she met the world, she then was, like touring internationally and like opening for Ariana Grande and was much more in the pop music world.
It is a funny thing, like, having like, cast a few people in that same sort of archetype. It's a rare thing to find someone who has experience and credits and fame, is famous enough to be able to get a movie financed or a show financed, who isn't a Disney kid. That's kind of like the only way that you can
it's
build
a
up your
camp.
chops.
It's
they are battle tested.
Such a pro.
So now that the movie's coming out, it's coming out this week, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that her having all these followers is gonna get them to the drive-in?
Time will tell.
I hope so.
We're doing a big, like a worldwide digital premiere on Monday night. And so that is like the equivalent of our premiere, where there's a screening and then there's a cast Q&A also with, Danny Trejo and with other folks. And so that is like a ticketed event that hopefully, her fans around the world will be able to join in for.
Well,
but it's sort of like anybody's guess.
The trailer on her Instagram account has 620,000 likes. So,
Yeah, they're already so active. I feel like when we started shooting the movie, we started an Instagram for just the movie, and people discovered it and were like responding in a way that is so unnatural for an indie movie. That's just like, we're on day 5 of the shoot and people are like, when can we watch it in theaters?
What if your movie is the gateway drug? What if yours is like, there's this whole generation of people who learn to love indie movies thanks to your movie?
That. Look, Titanic was built on the back of teen girls. Like, do not underestimate the...
Yeah, even with film festivals, like we would be in sort of any city in the country and her fans would show up like with their parents, and it was just like, I'm sure they've never been to a film festival in their lives, and it was kind of great to see them showing up to that. So they're
Where did you guys premiere?
To a lot.
We premiered at TriBeCa
right.
in 2019.
Can we rewind just a tiny bit and talk a touch about production, actually?
Sure.
Because I think we were joking about car rigs and movie stars and honey wagons and all that stuff. But tell us a little bit more about maybe the actual, how many days did you guys do the road trip of it all? Yeah. With a star who does have needs, like what was it like?
Yeah, like, and any tips you have too, because I have a road trip concept that I pitched to many people and everyone's like, don't make a road trip movie.
No,
it was a lot harder than we thought, but it was so worth it. I mean, I will say, to all of our cast credit, they were all so flexible with they were just kind of, as game as we could ask them to be. When we were shooting, I don't think, except for maybe 2 days, we had like a trailer, and it was just for all of the cast, mostly just to get them out of the New Mexico elements. Otherwise, it was like they were fine with kind of being whatever establishment was next door to where we were shooting. Best available
option, I think. Yeah,
it was,
right. While you guys are at the Four Seasons, you're like, Sabrina, we got you at the Motel 6. I think to me, the dream is always that, like, we're going to map out this movie on a real path and let's just shoot while we're traveling, right? And then you're like, well,
we had thought initially.
We have a ton of gear in the car.
Tell us how that plan unraveled and how you fixed it.
I mean, the sort of first shift was moving from, it was originally going to shoot around New Orleans, and we had done a scout and we were fully ready to shoot there. And then because of the tax credit, a lot of people sort of advised us that it wasn't the most stable tax credit because so many productions had just flooded their system. So then at that point, we just kind of looked at all of the states that had good tax credits, and New Mexico was so helpful in just talking to their film office. Like you could tell that they were like ready and happy for the indie coming in, and like they showed us around and it was great.
What was the credit there?
So
20%.
And then there was an additional percentage for this initiative that, like, if you move crew up from the role that they have typically done, if you bump them up, there's an additional percentage on that.
Like a local New Mexico crew.
Yeah.
They're all hopped up on like blue meth.
Yeah. All the Breaking Bad. But it's just like their crew is so amazing there. It was like, and the riggers from Breaking Bad are amazing gaffers, and they were great to work with. Like, it's sort of moving people up is a very easy thing when you're moving them up from a huge production.
Right. That is an interesting incentive.
And it's a cool way to get people, to be department heads for the first time. Yeah. And so they also have a lot on the line, even though it was like a non-union indie movie. It's like, they put so much sort of care and heart into it.
So with New Mexico, it was also, there's a variety of scenery within a short distance. We based in Albuquerque, and it was sort of like there are mountains to the east and desert to the west. There's kind of a variety of locations, so we could sort of make it feel like there was more distance traveled than just the actual distance that we physically traveled, because we didn't ever do a company move until the last day. And that was a pared down crew. And then it was just kind of mapping out. We did so many location scouts to find all of the different places. And I think Ani also adjusted the script a little bit based on the locations that we could or couldn't find. It was some rewrites happening to fit what was available. And then it was like a minimum of 2 company moves a day.
Well done.
And how big is the crew?
45.
45 locations?
Yeah.
Oh,
no,
45 folks
way more locations, because we shot for 20 days. And we had like 70 locations.
Oh my goodness.
70 locations. It was a lot of moving around.
I told Ani to write the next one just in one location. So
one location.
Really.
And are you
dig in?
Trying to plan kind of exteriors or like things around the time of day or like easier to light? Because when you're doing those many company moves.
It was a lot tricky to sort of, I will give our first AD, Artie Carlson, a huge shout out, because he, like, the scheduling for this movie was insane. And the way we broke it down was really first by actor. So it was like a week with Stephen Ogg, a week with Maggie Sipp, a week with Danny Trejo, and then a week that was with Rusty Schwimmer, who was Marcy in the film, and Jay Sean, who's Blue. And it was kind of like first cast and then location. It was like any other concerns were kind of secondary to those big needs to just shoot out the cast all condensed. If I could choose what time of day we were in a certain place, great, but it wasn't always in the cards. It was a lot of like day for night interiors, like building big, sort of blocking out whatever we needed to. But
and what about the car stuff? Like a lot of times the direction they're driving makes a big difference unless you have a process trailer and a ton of cops.
So we found out a couple weeks before we shot that Sabrina did not have a driver's license.
Man.
Which made a road trip movie really difficult. And to be fair, the van is impossible to drive for most people. It's a stick shift, and it's a tank, and it was just...
Yeah, it's not like, we'll give you some lessons and then you'll be good to go. Yeah, you can't.
It wasn't a
By the
quick
way,
fix.
It's pretty hard to drive and act at the same time.
It is.
Safely.
And I think more so we were like, we can get all this like driving footage where they're not like doing dialogue scenes, but, we can have them drive from location to location and sort of maximize all of the moves that we had for sort of filler footage. Yeah. And that went out the window immediately. Yeah. But we had 2 days of process trailer in 2 different locations, and we just shot out all of the driving sequences we needed on like basically 2 roads that we knew we could close off.
Yeah.
So you just changed wardrobe or did whatever you needed to do for that.
It was just like a lot of back and forth driving.
Yeah. At least you've got a nice big van. I mean, honestly, like, I think the idea of like, we'll get the driving footage while we're literally driving. I've done that a couple times. The footage is never that good. And you're also blowing so much time rigging the car for footage that's not really worth it, and then taking it off afterwards. It's like such a bummer. Yeah. It's like, it seems romantic and cool and like organic, and it's just like frankly, I think a waste of time. So like, do it safe, be concise. That's the way to go. Yeah. Yeah,
definitely. And then we did do, after, I think we were most of the way picture locked, we did a pickup, 2 days of pickup shots where we went back to Albuquerque, and it was like inserts
without your
actors. It was like second unit. It was like 2 days.
And it was
of
great
unit
because we could shoot really specifically exactly what we needed, instead of just sort of like hours and hours of like rolling out the window
Well, we'll probably need a shot of the gas tank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we were able to drive further out from where we were able to go on a normal shoot day and take, the hour to drive somewhere to get certain footage. So those days were very valuable.
I think that is
fun too.
That is the dream, is to like shoot your movie, cut it, and then figure out what B-roll you need, and then go shoot it.
Yeah, I almost feel like
helpful.
that's like, it felt like something that is a good template to just like do right off the bat, instead of sort of then being like, oh, we should actually do this pickup.
It's a great idea unless there's a pandemic.
Yeah. Get
True.
what you can when you're there.
Which is where I'm living right now.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Matt produced a movie that finished shooting
It's
right
okay.
before COVID.
Yeah. So we got the lion's share of the movie done.
So
But,
all the B-roll is just like little models he's
Yikes.
made in his living room,
Yeah,
shot on his iPhone.
Yeah. I
Stock
wish.
footage.
We have done like a lot of like
Animated.
iPhone insert versions, like as for temp, so we know where it needs to land, which is
Placeholder.
really nice. But like it would be so easy to bang out the 10 shots we need in one day real fast, but we just maybe mid-July we'll be able to do it. I don't know, we'll see.
Yeah.
It's okay.
So
It's okay.
upsetting. I'm so sorry for you.
Well, we should probably wrap up soon, but can you give us, since the movie, by the time this episode comes out, will already be out, possibly at a drive-in near you, like why should people go see the movie?
Go see the movie, because if you can't take a road trip, live vicariously through the short
there you
history of
go.
the long road.
That's true. Yeah,
That's
if you've
been
got
our
a
big
little
plug.
wanderlust. Yeah, that's great. I love that.
Well, we're excited. If people want to find out more about the movie,
All the info is on our website, shorthistorylongroad.com. And then you can find us on Instagram at shorthistorylongroad and on Twitter at roadfilm.
Well, awesome. Well, are you two good to hang out and endorse with us real quick?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Unpaid endorsements.
It's been a pretty stressful time for everyone. And so a tiny little thing that has brought me genuine joy and great relief is the Instagram account Pasta Grannies. Do you know this account?
It's the best.
It's the
Yeah.
best. And
So
it's
soothing.
just very skilled old women making pasta. And
Pasta Grannies.
it's quite impressive. I wonder if you two have theories on this. It's different people every time. So like I'm wondering who's taking, are they just trolling hashtags and like trying to just source different pasta grannies? Are they sending photographers out? I'm curious about the behind the scenes of Pasta Grannies is what I'm saying.
I
It's
feel like
this
the
one
demographic
woman.
is not present online typically. Like they're not out there.
Yeah,
Lots
yeah,
of grannies
exactly.
doing that.
It's a lot of
naturally.
grandkids, but are they tagging their grandma Pasta Grannies?
Well, they're all in Italy, right? So
Yeah.
it must be
Yeah.
it must
And
be
they're all
someone
like
in Italy.
100 years old.
I would endorse, I can't tell sometimes how many people know about these things because I'm just in my quarantine bubble, but I have been a big fan of Shot Deck lately,
Oh, yeah.
which is a website that's like an online,
From
it's
Lawrence
a library
Sher.
of searchable film stills. Yeah.
Is it still in beta? Is it invite only? Is that the site I'm thinking of?
I think that they've expanded it because I was just talking
Okay.
to our producer who she was like, I'm using Shot Deck, thinking of you, like channeling you. I
Yeah.
love it so much. It's like, I feel like we didn't talk about lookbooks, but lookbooks are like my favorite thing to make and I think so valuable. And even in quarantine have been using Shot Deck to make lookbooks and just kind of find inspo.
Is that your main source for lookbook images?
I feel like it's usually where I start, and then even if they don't have every film, like seeing one film or one director or an actor like will trigger me to think of another film that I wanted to think about, and then I can just Google image that if they don't have it. It's like a helpful place to start and just like get your brain going down that rabbit hole that then leads you to, other images online potentially too. I've been very big fan of that, and I shout it
Yeah.
out all the time.
I know
can't wait for an
started
excuse
by
to use it.
by Larry Sher, who shot like
Yeah.
The Joker and a million other awesome things.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I didn't.
Yeah.
My
It's
only
so
complaint is
brilliant.
I feel like they could tag more. Like to me, the value in those
Yeah.
databases, like woman walking away from camera, like kid playing outside. Those are kind of, especially in commercials, you're kind of trying to find very specific genders, races, images, framings, lighting. And it's a lot more like DP, camera, lens, like all these things that I would never search for.
Right. True. It is sort of like the more the tags expand, that'll be helpful. But I feel like once you get really going down that, you're like, oh, they didn't necessarily tag it, but like it triggers my memory to be like, oh yeah, there's this shot with hands touching a brick wall, and like that's what I really need for this lookbook.
I love that one.
Yeah, classic shot. Yeah, that's my endorsement.
My endorsement is because I guess it's just more screen time. I feel like it's been tough getting away from screens during core. But I have this great backyard, which has been like a total slice of paradise. And there's a really good masterclass taught by Ron Finley, who is in LA, about urban gardening. And so that was my first master class, but I signed up with my mom and my sister. And now I've got like a whole I don't know if you can see, like a whole Corona garden going on.
Oh, cool. That's great.
So, yeah.
Oh, man.
The life on the commune. We won't go hungry. Thanks to Ron Finley. Thank you, Ron Finley.
I'm going to watch that today. I've actually been getting those ads and didn't think about it, but that sounds right up my alley.
It's great. They're also incredibly well shot. Like the production value of Masterclass is out of control.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, it really makes you want to watch it way more than sort of janky
like a YouTube video.
videos.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm going to build off of that. We did plant a garden in the back. We have some tomatoes, cucumbers, strawberries, and one other thing, basil maybe. But something happened and our plants got sick, and there's this app called Plantix where you can take a picture of your plants and it identifies what disease they have. And apparently what my cucumber plant has, there's some cucumber beetle that has a wilt, some issue that it says you literally are supposed to pull the plant out and burn it. And it's you can't fix it. Just make sure it doesn't spread to your other plants. And I think it already spread to my strawberries. So we're just letting it ride. But I thought it's kind of insane that you could just take a picture of something.
Take a picture of your plant
with your phone.
Yeah.
And diagnose it. So thanks for talking to us, guys. And you guys, I'm just going to plug your website, AniSimonKennedy.com and Cailin Yatsko, YATSKO.com. You have both two very awesome, I am going to guess, Squarespace sites.
That's correct.
Yeah,
but they're really good. When we tell
for life.
Yeah, when we tell people about what we think makes a good website, it's your websites are the example.
Ooh, I'll have to check them out.
Thank you.
And
is it a panel of thumbnails, well selected thumbnails, maybe a
well, they do
over...
look a lot like Matt and my website. Maybe more like my website than Matt's website.
Look, it's easy. It's that's the move, right? Showcase your good stuff. Yeah.
What else do you need?
I wanted something to be totally out of the box and for me to be oh man, I gotta update mine. But I think we just have all kind of figured out.
Yeah, it's all about the pictures and nothing. Don't do anything else.
Yeah. Anyway, enough website talk. It's been such a treat. By the time you're listening to the Short History of the Long Road, will be available in a drive-in near you. Is it doing VOD as well?
Yeah.
At the same time?
So it'll be in drive-in Friday. Monday is our digital premiere. Tuesday, we're available on demand and online.
Gotcha. So it'll be available to people by the time they're listening to this on all of the places that you normally watch movies. If you want to learn more about the show, check out the trailer, all that stuff, you can go to justshootitpod.com and follow us across all social media at justshootitpod. I'm at Mr. Matt Enlow.
And I'm at OKaplan on Instagram. And you can also email us at justshootitpod@gmail.com. Any questions, comments, ideas. Our webmaster is Ewan Williams, and the music you're listening to is from the Free Music Archive and the artist Jahzzar. And we'll catch you next time. Thanks for joining us.